Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special episode of Not Another CEO podcast. We've pulled out highlights from each of the interviews and edited them together for this episode. Before we get into the meat of the episode, I wanted to say thank you to everyone who has supported me and the podcast since we launched 4 months ago. Honestly, it's been an amazing experience. The feedback has been energizing, and I've learned so much from the CEOs I've had on the podcast. Hopefully you have too. I've had the opportunity to interview a wide range of CEOs, founders, and hired CEOs who took over for a founder, people I've known since childhood, and people I met for the first time when recording the podcast. People who are on their fourth company, and a number of first-time founders. People who have raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and some that have bootstrapped to tens of millions in revenue. All of them have been generous with their time and knowledge, and I'm thankful for that. We're 18 episodes in, and we have listeners in more than 35 countries. Thousands of people have watched and listened to the episodes over these 4 months. I've received hundreds of comments, emails, and texts telling me how much people are learning. If you're one of the people who've been enjoying the episodes, I'd love if you subscribed, liked, rated, commented on your favorite platform. It helps spread the word. Okay, now to the episode. The first question I ask every guest is, what is one thing you've done, big or small, that's had the biggest impact on your company, and you do again if you're CEO of another company in the future? On today's special episode, you're going to hear what the 19 CEOs I've interviewed so far would do and why, starting from episode 1. You can see timestamps for each CEO in the show notes.
Easy. First, when we just got started, creating our values from day one, making them really deep in the company, and then turning that into kind of a mission statement, which is what our mission statement is: to be living proof you can win in business while being human first. And how do we make sure that we never forget, person on the other side of the Zoom or the podcast is a human being, whether it's a customer, employee, alumni, even somebody who churned you, an investor, they're all human beings first. That's absolutely what's driven us.
And how'd you define those values? Did you define them?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's interesting because I feel like one of the mistakes people make is not making it personal and thinking that they just need to look at what other companies are doing. So for me, it was, what do I care about? And I think at the end of the day, the CEO, founder, it's like it's that what you care about is like the DNA of the company. Eventually, everyone that you hire cares about that. So we have 5 values: golden rule, treat people the way you want to be treated; success for all, drive success for all our stakeholders; childlike joy, bring the kid in you to work every day; shoshin, which is a Japanese word for beginner's mind; and stay thirsty, my friends, which is definitely a copyright violation from a Dos Equis commercial, all about internal drive. And so we've got these 5 values. They're kind of quirky, and they're like ours.
Very memorable. Very memorable.
They're my values, like my life too. So it's actually, I think that's what I tell CEOs is the only way to have good culture is make it something you truly care about. If you make it like, I read a blog post from somebody else, it's going to be a total sham.
Oh, that's a tough one. There's so many things. You make hundreds of decisions. It feels like every week. But I would say the thing I would absolutely repeat foundationally and fundamentally is focus. I'm a big believer in creating a category, picking a niche, focusing on something that's underserved to create a natural disparity between supply and demand in the market. And obviously that has a lot to do with timing. And anybody who's done anything big, you included, David, I'm sure you would include luck as part of everyone's story. So it helps to get lucky, as well as working really hard and making the right bets. So picking the right niche, I would say I would repeat over and over again.
So I love that because the number one thing I'm seeing with early stage companies I'm working with is lack of focus, because they feel like they have to attack the whole world to build a big business. So when you think about, your experience, how do you choose what to focus on? And you've been doing it 20 years, and I would argue, over that time, I mean, you've evolved the business a lot
For
over
sure.
that time. But let's just go early days. How did you really choose what to focus on?
I think in the very, very early days, especially in a services business, it's completely natural to say yes to everything and to try a bunch of things to see what sticks, what the market truly needs. You want to discover your own talents as a company or as a leader around what you have a natural affinity for, a passion for, that you can provide exceptionally better than everyone else. So I think, that's okay to start that way, and actually recommended to start that way. We certainly tried a bunch of different things, from, .NET application development to web design to, we talk about, voice over IP, things that were very early and not yet well established. We kept trying. And I think in the process of trying to find the right technology niche, simultaneously, we're trying to find the right business model at the same time. And ultimately, it led us to fall in love with things that were scalable and distributed. Cloud, for example, it's a service delivery model that solved a lot of problems relative to what we saw early in on-premise, systems and servers and platforms. We saw those, full of holes and full of problems, full of challenges, but also business models. We fell in love with a way to charge customers that had their best interest in mind around, managed services, fixed fee engagements, recurring revenue. We fell in love with those things. Anything that depends on a customer failing for you to make money, to me, is bad. For example, break fix, IT services early days. It was like, we're like literally waiting for, like, I hope a customer gets a virus so I can go charge to, like, take the virus off, that didn't make much sense to me. Concurrently, that provided no predictability in terms of revenue. It's like, well, if a customer, if a hard drive crashes, then I have a job to go fix the hard drive. So early days, we knew that paradigm was flawed, and we very quickly moved to what was very novel at the time, which is like, well, let's prevent these things from happening, but charge for that preventative maintenance, right? So that was kind of the early days of what became kind of the de facto standard, which is managed services. But
Yeah, for sure. So we're an in-office culture, as you know. We're in the office 4 days a week, but we're remote every single Wednesday. And me personally, on Wednesdays, what I do is I don't take any internal meetings. And so that day I'll have some external meetings, but mostly it's for myself. And well, the way I like to think about it, David, is space favors offense. And that's a day a week that's really dedicated towards doing all the deep dives, whether it's the research on a specific topic, whether it's looking over a specific department, that's really doing well and want to understand exactly what's going on. So that individual time and creating that space during the week has been incredibly, incredibly successful for myself as well as John.
Have you always been in office
Always. Yes. We've always
from
been
the beginning?
from the day we started. Yeah.
What happened during COVID? Did you work remotely for some period?
Yeah, so during COVID, when the pandemic hit in March, the company went to a remote structure, just like kind of everyone did. No one kind of exactly knew what was going on. But actually, David, that fall, if you remember, we actually brought people back to the office, and we were actually in the office, on a couple of days a week earlier on, and then. If you remember, it's kind of like, COVID would spike and then we would go remote, and there was a little bit of back and forth. But as long as we felt it was safe during the pandemic and the different time periods, we always kept some amount of office presence.
And do you think that has been a competitive advantage to you? Has that been a challenge for you in terms of, when you think about hiring people and you think about building your team, how has that played out for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, it makes it more challenging. It also makes it more rewarding. And and then our employee NPS is very high. So the way I like to think about it is kind of like anything in life, the harder it is to build, the longer it lasts, type of a thing. So yes, it is more challenging to get employees. It is more challenging to actually run, right? Also, I think just even having 1 day remote and building your office cadence and all that stuff takes a lot of planning. But when you get the right people and they're bought in and they're excited about it, David, there's a whole group of people out there that want to come into the office. They want the excitement. They want to build the relationships. They want to learn. They want to be in that apprentice type model where they're sitting next to someone that has more experience than them, and that person's dedicating the time, right? And all the stuff, you call it the water cooler or all the serendipity, right? The small things that you just can't create online. I think that we're not the only ones that enjoy it. Actually, we know for a fact, because we get the feedback from the employees that work here. It creates a pretty special environment, and something that used to be standard, right? Has now become something that isn't as popular as it once worked, but it works for us.
It's interesting because I've actually seen more and more companies going back to the office and actually talking to people earlier in their career who are looking to be in office. And I've been to your office obviously many times, and you feel an energy there that you can't feel when you're on Zoom. And I like your model because I do like that 1 day where people can be remote, because you can get a lot done when you're by yourself at home, no distractions. But there's something about the culture and the camaraderie, and you just feel a different energy around a company. And again, I'm seeing it change. I'm actually talking to people who are 2, 3, 4 years out of school saying they've never been in an office, and they feel now like they're missing out. It sounded great, all the flexibility, but now there's a realization, maybe I'm missing out. And that feels, I think we're going to see a continuous trend back into the office for a lot of companies.
Yeah, totally. For me, it's definitely the Revivn way, David. So we've always had a strong culture here with a lot of values, but we never really wrote those down until later on into the company. And I think that Anthony and I took a lot of stuff for granted that we didn't realize was so important to building a company culture. So early on, we were like, oh, everybody knows the values, everybody knows what we care about. But then you keep going and the company gets bigger, and you realize how explicit and organic these things have to be if you really want to scale. And we really took this exercise and spent a lot of time on it. And I remember thinking, how are we spending so much time on this? I need to be talking to customers. I have all this other stuff I need to be doing. But what I realized was when we wrote the values down and we did a company kickoff, and we really basically explained the whole story of every single value, from the rigatoni rule to work with your hands, show up, earn it, no excuses. Everybody started to understand how our company history tied into what we do now over a decade later. So I don't think, starting a company, you really have to nail those values down. They definitely evolve as a company changes and grows. But to me, it's like it was an amazing game changer. And now every day people walk in here in the office, they see it on the wall, and they know what we're all about from their first day at Revivn.
How long did it take you to actually get those values? I mean, the values you have today that you mentioned, could you have written those same values down day one when you two started the company?
On day one, no, we couldn't have. I think we could have described them and we knew what we were about, but it was like probably almost a 3-month process to write them down. We actually have like a book that people get when they start at Revivn. It's called the Revivn Way. It documents values, and it actually has explicit stories, whether it's like a pop culture thing in the movies or a TV show, or something that happened in Revivn's history, to really make sure people understand what it means. And even going further, we re-onboard people because we want to go through the values again with them. So for us, this is a consistent thing that we're constantly driving through our culture, David.
I think the thing that has had the biggest impact on Sweet Loren's is the quality of the products we've always launched. So I started as a cookie dough brand. It's sold in the refrigerated cookie dough section of, supermarkets across the country. And I was am still, but obsessive about the quality and the experience that the customer would get, so that they weren't just, having an experience that was, oh, this is good. I wanted it to be, exactly what you said, like, wow, one of the best cookies in the world, best thing I've tasted. Just an incredible experience, because in the early days, And still, even today, we don't spend a lot of marketing. And in the early days, we spent nothing on marketing. And with a really great product that really solved a need, we just built a raving fan base, and they did the selling for us. They would tell their friends, they would repeat buy. They became incredibly passionate and became our advocates. So I think the quality of the product has made our brand really stand for something. And honestly, then you don't need to market it. It sells itself.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was telling you before we got going today that actually my wife loved the cookies so much she then went and told our kids' school and probably going to now tell their camp. And so I get that. I want to ask a tactical question, which is when you say the quality, is it of the food? It's like just the cookie dough, or of the packaging, or, how deep, I guess, are we going when you say quality? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. To be honest, I think quality in every single way. So quality of the product first and foremost, because especially with food, I mean, you're not going to get someone to buy it again unless it's delicious. They had such a great experience. So the consistency and the quality and taste of Sweet Loren's cookie dough really is first and foremost. But then also you think about it, well, we're selling our cookie dough in the refrigerated dough section of supermarkets across the country, whether that's Wegmans, Whole Foods, Publix, Kroger, Stop and Shop, et cetera. And like our package is this big, right? Like it's you have to scream, your selling points and really stand out against 30,000 other products. So then, in order to even be seen and to drive trial, how do you have really smart packaging? How do you really think about how it stands out compared to, your competition that you're going to be, sitting right next to on the shelf? How do you convey, what your most important selling points are? For us, for Sweet Loren's, it was always about like improved flavor and quality of ingredients. Taste was going to be number one, but then also we're very simple, good ingredients. So it's non-GMO, it's gluten-free, it's dairy-free, peanut, tree nut free, it's plant-based. So just figuring out the hierarchy of how you design your packaging and the colors you choose so that it pops off shelf and it conveys the message you want. So, and then everything counts. What is that experience of that customer bringing it home and opening the package, and what does it look like inside? And then what do the directions say, and how easy is it to make? With Sweet Loren's, we try to make it as easy as possible. So the packaging is, pre-portioned, you saw that. So it's like 12 circular portions that come in this tray, so that if you just want to make 2 cookies for you and your wife at night, you can do that and keep the rest refrigerated or even put in the freezer. And that way it's really easy to like enjoy Sweet Loren's as much as you want. You can make the all 12 cookies. You can make a couple at a time. You can throw it in your toaster oven, your air fryer, your regular oven. But just, again, how easy is it for someone to bring it into their lives? And so I think, really trying to think about all of the touch points and have quality in all of them. I just think consumers are very savvy now, and they demand excellence, and they expect it. And honestly, I want to be proud of all aspects of the business, even customer service. If someone messages us and has a great experience, or maybe they're complaining about something, I want to make sure they are super taken care of, because it makes them even more of an advocate for the brand when they know that someone cares and has heard them out and is like helping fix the situation.
Where did that come from? I fully get it. With food, what you're saying is extremely logical, more than software, for example. I mean, even with software, you want it to be high quality, but with food, you have no choice. I mean, it needs to be. Where did that come from? Was there some inspiration that told you this is what I'm going to do, or that's just innately who you are?
I think it's innately who I am, but it's also, I also saw how food, unlike, tech or software, you're eating it, you're giving it to your kids. Like, you don't want anyone to get sick. Our product is allergen free. So we also, we have people that just love cookies, and we have people that, have a serious gluten allergy or dairy allergy. So, they might email us a question about something because, they're really concerned about the safety and health of their kid or themselves. And so, I just realized with what we were doing, there was such a heightened level of, health and safety that could affect, the person.
Mm.
And so we have to be, the most trustworthy. We have to really make sure everything we do makes people feel safe and that they can count on us. And, that's really what the brand is. But also, I just would start to look at even how I looked at other companies. So for instance, like I flew, before I moved to LA, I was in New York City, and I would come to the West Coast a lot. And before I married my husband, we did long distance for 2.5 years, and he was in San Francisco. So we did New York, San Francisco for 2.5 years, and I was coming to LA a lot. And so anyway, I lived on JetBlue. And I actually learned a lot from JetBlue, just in the way, like, why was I choosing that airline? Like they had the best customer service, especially in the earlier days, but best customer service. I felt it was fun to fly them. I love their edgy, fun marketing. They felt different than the corporate airlines. And so they felt approachable, and they weren't just following kind of the same playbook, that everyone else was doing. And so I think I started to see that if I flew a different airlines and maybe had a bad experience, and then their customer service wasn't a good experience, I would be like, I don't need to fly them again, or that will not be my first choice. Mm-hmm. And so I just started to see how, like, we all, myself included, like we're all picky and we want a great experience. And so if you don't kind of have a great experience, there's other options out there.
I think the biggest thing for me is assembling the executive team. I feel like that a great CEO really is measured by the quality of the team that they surround themselves with, that S team, that senior level right around themselves. And so I think that doing that, obsessing over that, spending most of your time like focused on getting the right folks in the right seats at that level will have this trickle down effect that really will define, or at least really, I think define your chances of success more than any other thing you do. And I would even throw it up there with maybe compare and contrast it with spending a lot of time making sure that executive team is really high functioning. That's also a great use of time for a CEO. But I would say most importantly is getting the right folks in those seats, even before trying to optimize how the team performs as a group.
It's a good question. I had to think about it. There's probably a couple of things, but I think my favorite answer, which maybe had the biggest impact, certainly for me and then SaaStock, was when I finally decided to get an exec coach, right? We're in our 9th year of operation now, and effectively what SaaStock does, right, and what we've done since the beginning is help other entrepreneurs, and specifically SaaS entrepreneurs, be less lonely, connect them with each other, help them grow their businesses. And I was doing this for, initially hundreds and then thousands of entrepreneurs, but actually not doing anything for myself for a very long time as a first-time founder. And I was just trying to figure it out, like, by myself, right? I think, it was like 4 or 5 years into my journey. I kind of was really looking at, like, should I get an exec coach? I probably need it. Like, we're a growth business, and I certainly need to grow as a CEO. I don't always know what I'm doing, like, for sure. I mean, every day I kind of wake up, but you have some sort of confidence in what you're doing, and then you sometimes you're thinking, well, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. But I think I ended up, I think it was a LinkedIn outreach from an exec coach, and he just hit me at the right timing, right? So he reached out to me. I was thinking about it, so it was top of mind, and that's generally when the best outreach is done, right? When you reach out to a lot of people, but if you're reaching out when and you're getting in somebody's mind, I was like, let's have a call, and I kind of connected with the guy who's called Eric Partaker. Interestingly, he was the CEO of a burrito, a Mexican food company, or a burrito company, previously worked at McKinsey, but I think it had been sort of pretty successful to an extent. And I just kind of liked his style, and I ended up staying with him for 4 years. And I think also we engaged just before COVID, right? And COVID really kind of impacted the business, and it was like one of the roughest years I've had in 9 years of operation. And I think I could have made the choice, because we really had to cut costs, and we had to cut team members. Like during COVID, we went from 24 to 9 people. But I made the decision to stay with my exec coach, and he did reduce rates. Like he was kind of understanding at that time. And that really helped me steer through what was perhaps one of my most difficult years as a CEO, but then ultimately grow, kind of over time to being, a better leader of the company. And so I think for me, it's definitely had the most impact for sure. Yeah.
I have so many questions on this, because we've talked about this before, and I've never had a coach, and but I have heard this same advice from countless people, and did you I have so many questions. First of all, like you said, he comes from a completely different space than what we do, what you do. Was that a challenge? Can he understand the position you're in, even though he's kind of from something completely different?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And I kind of perhaps I thought about it, for a moment when I kind of looked at obviously what is his credentials, right? But what I saw was that he grew a company to, I think, certainly a bigger size than what SaaStock was, right? So ultimately, we wanted to grow to a certain size, right? We still do. We still want to grow. And he'd kind of done that where I wanted to go to, right? So he had those credentials, he had the chops, right? From that perspective, he'd also worked as a consultant at McKinsey, and he was just naturally a very smart guy, right? So he understood business, and he told me his story, right? So you could kind of connect at a human level, which I think was important. And so not only was there certainly initially, because we did adapt, but coaching around being a better CEO, coaching around being a better husband, coaching around being a better father as well, right? So I kind of had these things. So it was business and personal, initially. But then I think at some point we really then started to focus more just on the business side of things, right? So ultimately, I think I needed help on all of those three things, initially, right? Probably still do as well. But that's kind of where we started. But I think because he was smart enough, and obviously he'd done the education around being a CEO coach as well, which I think was important, because ultimately they're asking the questions, and then I'm answering my own question through his guidance to get to the answer, right? And I think there are and maybe this is fine, there are CEO coaches out there that perhaps haven't done that educational piece and trained with other executive coaches and so on, but he'd done that groundwork, right? And that kind of came across. So I think ultimately it didn't concern me certainly that much, and he got to understand the business very quickly, because he could understand how to read a P&L, and he could understand people problems and all of these things, right? And so it wasn't a challenge for me, for sure.
How often did you speak with him?
Yeah, I think during the COVID years, initially it was once a week, right? And we only ever got to meet once in person, and that was just I think initially we were going to be I was going to be coached in person, and he came to our office in London in Clerkenwell, and the next week COVID just shut down the world, right? And we ended up just doing everything on Zoom, and then maybe I think he pivoted to just realizing I could just do this on Zoom, and I can take global clients, and this will be fine. We then end up moving to every other week, right? And it usually would be I think on a Monday, sort of later in the day on a Monday, and actually quite often. And I think this is just maybe just natural, perhaps not just with CEOs, right? But you look at your calendar, for the day or for the week, and then I look at, I've got my coaching session at this time. I could do with buying back this time because I've got so much to do. And then I was thinking negatively about, things suck at the moment, and I don't really want to have this, whether personal or business, and I don't want to have this call. But I always felt better for taking the call, and I always felt better afterwards, and I always kind of had this clarity that we talked about the important things, and I knew whatever I was struggling with and internalizing that perhaps I didn't really want to speak about, that I had some clarity as to the direction, after that call. So it was always worth doing, even when I never really kind of felt like it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you say that about the training and you say about helping you not just with the business but personal, it's very much like it's very much like a therapist in so many ways, and it's finding a person who has business acumen but who also is not going to judge you, and who's not, it's not your wife, and it's not your partner, and it's not your employee, and it's not your customer, and it's just somebody who can. I get that a lot. I actually, when you say it like that, I never really thought actually like that, but it's having that person that you can just, on a bad day or a good day or whatever it is, just talk through stuff with, and many times probably the answer. You just need to talk through it and have someone who's got business acumen who can kind of be a sounding board. It sounds like.
Yeah, 100% right. And because look, I mean, I've got great people in the team and in the leadership team, and I have an MD, as well, and we obviously talk about things and not only business but also personal things. I think that's kind of like important, to an extent. But have that person that was just not attached to the company, whether an advisor or on the board or part of the team, and just kind of go to this person and let's say have that therapy, look for certain answers, get the things that you've been like holding internally, trying to kind of get them out to ultimately make you feel lighter and give you that direction. I think was really good. Now I was with him for 4 years, and I'm currently don't have an exec coach, right? So I kind of felt that reached a certain I don't know, like point where okay, I think I just sort of need a break from it, at this moment. But I think, like, to your question, you said, like, if I started another company, like, what would I do? I think I definitely would look to this, because I'm sure, again, I mean, starting a company is it's not for everybody, right? And it requires a special skill set. Obviously, you've got people out there that buy companies because they're not very good at starting companies, and you've got people who are great at starting companies. And I think I'm really good at starting companies, but perhaps maybe not the best in the world at scaling a company, right? And so that's probably like my sweet spot. But yeah, I think for sure I would do it again, right?
I was thinking about this, and I think it would have to be the idea of communal rituals. I actually wish I was more intentional about doing that earlier. We have a bunch of communal rituals at Pursuit. I mean, you shared a little about what we do at Pursuit, but something I think that is maybe distinctive is that we have many different kind of customers and kind of stakeholders to kind of do what we do. And so this idea of communal activity is really kind of important. So some examples of that is, a lot of our focus on helping people get jobs for starting a new career. So when that happens, we have an event that creates a celebration moment for that. And that integrates many different kinds of people in the organization, in our community. And it's a shared experience, even though people coming from very different places and very different perspectives.
When did that start? When did that ritual start?
That's a good question. I don't know, maybe a few years in. It kind of evolved over time. It was different in person than during COVID on Zoom and online, for both good and bad. And I wonder what we're gonna do again now that we're pretty much shifting back in person. So
Can you describe the ritual a little bit? Because I've seen the ritual, and like I think it's before we ever met. Actually, I watched a video online.
Is that right?
And saw, and that was one of the things where, I mean, I'll be honest, I got goosebumps. Watching that video.
Yeah, thank you. It's very simple, but I guess giving some everyone context. So we're focused on helping create these good jobs and primarily working with adults from working class backgrounds. Maybe you were a retail worker before, or maybe you were an Uber driver, maybe you work in hospitality. So whatever you're doing in your life, your 20s, 30s, 40s, or whatever kind of age, and people are dedicating themselves over multiple years to kind of make a transformation in that. And so at the moment of a new job and career, it may be a year, 2 years, some other time later when you started on this journey. And so, it's a big deal. It's a big moment. You highlight it. So different ways how it's a big deal. You highlighted, David, how a person on average is earning about $18,000 before pursuit. Upon that first job, you're earning on average right now it's about $94,000. That's transformative, obviously, and it's there. So, one thing is a celebration, obviously, and recognizing that. And, again, that might take a couple years, but really, I think what it's about also, so it's very simple. The individual, we call the individuals that go through our program, fellows, speaks about their experience and almost gives like a life, like what it took for that person to get there. So there's a little setup introduction, there's, a celebration. And I think what's powerful for people sometimes is that just hearing about, just people's life journeys and what they've overcome and what this means for them and that's still the beginning of what a career is. I know here we're talking about CEOs and companies, but we're on these paths, right? And just hearing these kind of major milestones for that, and including this is not just an individual, but really, the company, the employer that that's joining, and the people involved there, and people that might have interviewed this person or were working with them on the team now, like had no idea, to the person's instructors, to family members, to all these other folks that have touched a person along the way. And then you also see, it's one person's journey, but what do we all contribute to that and how we all part of a similar journey and what that means. So, I think sometimes it's very emotionally resonant and powerful. So
it's the first time, so I came to demo day, I went and looked, it was November of 21.
Wow. Yeah.
And I remember coming to demo day and seeing this group present. I saw all the groups present, and I remember distinctly one of the people she was a hairdresser before, and then she had started to learn, through the fellowship program, learn how to code, and was presenting this application that her and her team built and telling her story. And I just remember saying, wow, this, now I've been to a couple demo days since then, and the stories are amazing. The products that they build are amazing. You almost can't imagine, and I guess the demo day is another ritual, really,
right,
in the motion that you guys do.
Right. Totally. Absolutely. Like the communal, and that's also another communal experience, right? It's an individual, but then who are all the people otherwise involved in that? And it's this other kind of milestone. The milestones are really important. And so, that's something we started doing in the beginning. And, it's tweaking, in tech, obviously there's these classic product launches and demo days, but I think the difference for us in this, tweaking it to what does it mean for an individual and what is their background and story and what is the trajectory and how other people contribute that. And then that becomes more communal also in a way. So, yeah.
I think for us, it would probably be our all hands format. And so since the early days, even when we were 3 or 4 people, we would go on a monthly basis where you spend an hour as a company and a team and really just look and reflect on everything that we did that month, how we're tracking towards performance, have sort of specific curated discussions around what is the most impactful thing for the business and how those projects going. And of course, it's changed as we've grown from 5 people to 50 people to 200 people, but it's been a huge part about sort of our identity and maintaining culture and making sure we're communicating the right way and everyone's informed in how we're doing. And so I think we'll take that with us, anytime I start something else, a new business ever again, or in the future, like something that we always kind of have a good heartbeat and rhythm on.
So how often, what's the cadence of those meetings?
Yeah, we do them monthly. We are very transparent. So we show our financials to the entire company and talk about performance against plan. We review all of our different metrics that we're pursuing as business and different teams, and if we think we're sort of red, yellow, green against those objectives and goals, and then we really break it down into a wide variety of other topics. And I think the really cool thing that we do in every single all hands from the early days is actually shout outs. You got to come to one a couple months ago, so you got to see this, but sometimes we get like 6 slides worth of people in the company just celebrating each other, thanking them for, job well done, or helping them with a certain area of the business, or performing really well for our customers, or launching a great piece of technology. And so monthly, basically, we go into this really cool cadence where we're really, our entire company is shouting each other out. And I think that built a really strong culture for the business. So it's been a huge part, I think, of the HC culture, and something I'll try and take everywhere.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, I was lucky to be there for an all hands, and it was amazing actually to watch. One of the things that I caught on to, or that I thought was really interesting, is how many voices, how many different people spoke. How do you choose who speaks? Is it always different people? Because that to me was really interesting. I think I heard 6-7 people maybe, in the course of one all hands, which is a lot.
Yeah. I made the mistake that, or maybe not the mistake, but I think every company sort of does in the early days, where all hands, it's usually just one voice and it's mine. And you get to a point where I think that works well in the early days of the business, just because, obviously you generally, if a founding CEO is starting a company and they've got this idea of what the vision should be, and communicating that vision really specifically, directly, is hard when it hasn't manifested itself into reality yet. So it's hard to really be inclusive of tons of different voices, all communicating sort of this nebulous vision. But once you get to significant sort of scale or moderate scale, I started pulling back. And I just think when the rest of the company shares what they're working on, or drives some of the cultural elements of the business, my job is maybe to hit 5 minutes of the presentation on the biggest thing that we're working on, but really let the rest of the company kind of share their perspective. And we found that works really well for a lot of different reasons in scaling.
I mean, you spoke the least actually, in that all hands. It was honestly, it was really cool. The other thing that I noticed is I saw a lot of people asking questions, even some challenging questions, in the open. I mean, there was no, how do you, I don't know how to, how do you foster that? How does that work? Because that's another thing, at least for me, that I think it's hard to create that environment where people can do that. Is that a intentional thing from the beginning? Or is that something that has kind of evolved over time?
Both. So one of our values is we ask why. And so one of the things that I find builds a great culture is, really making sure that you create an environment where people feel comfortable asking questions when they don't quite know the answer, or if they're curious about something. And I think too often, and I've been a part of these in different corporate cultures, asking questions or narrowing the gap on knowledge is actually seen as a weakness, and or you not knowing your job, or what you're supposed to be doing. And even with the best communicators in the world, which I'm far from even close, but even the best communicators in the world, if you have an audience of 100 people, you may only really be able to engage and get through to 70, 80% of them, right? So they're distracted on their phones. They're thinking about something that happened before they walked into the meeting. And so it's kind of our take that if you don't really build a culture where people are comfortable asking a really hard or direct question, or asking something that they don't know, it's actually impossible to actually close the gap on what you're trying to build together. And so we want to create an environment where people really know the good and the bad. They really know what we're marching towards. And we find that it's more effective than sort of guardrailing or gaining information in different ways. And especially you think about Better Cloud and all the businesses you've built over the years, to win, you really need to be in it as a team, the good and the bad. And I think that's also something I always valued from our relationship is you never sugarcoated a thing. You were direct about exactly what you wanted. You're direct about what the business needs, and you're open to different ideas. But I think that level of directness is what creates a great culture. And I think if you're transparent, you train people to not just get obsessed with the good news, but also working together to fix the tough moments and the problems as well. And it's something that's important to us.
Yeah. I think I've said this a lot to people, especially first-time founders, is I feel like there's so much pressure on your shoulders when you're the one who has all the information and you're the one making all the decisions. and in a almost, you could argue, selfish way, telling everyone else about the challenges and telling everyone else about the things that need to get improved. I think it helps you, and a lot of times someone has the answer actually that's at the company, and but if they don't know that there's a problem, they can't tell you, their ideas for how to fix it. So I love that. I think the all hands is really important. I think it's an important part of the operating rhythm, the breathing apparatus of the company. An important question. This is a very tactical question, but it's who manages that all hand, like who actually puts that all hands together every week? I'm sorry, every month, because that is quite a bit of work. Who owns that?
Yeah, in the early days, it was all my co-founders. I mean, I sort of organizing the information, distilling it into different decks and slides, and then putting it on a monthly basis. Now we've actually built a pretty good infrastructure where, 3 to call it 6 days before the actual all hands, we'll almost create a bit of a run a show. And as a leadership team, we'll talk about all the different themes that we think are the most important. And so we always have about 50% of the content that's consistent across every single all hands. So that's pretty easily pullable and structured. The next 50% usually isn't. And so what we'll do is we'll sort of crowdsource questions from the team that they think are things that we need to close the gap on. And then what we'll do next is, as a leadership team, discuss how we're going to spend, the 50% of the time in the unstructured sort of content or templatized version. And then once we align on that, then it's really responsible for whatever leader is up for sharing content. So I think when you joined, there was a big section around our expert network and how that powers search and the progress and some of the projects that we're doing. So we had one of our leaders, Ashley, who drives that, really present. And so we'll have basically our leaders crowdsource ideas. We'll, as a leadership team, align in what we want to present. Once we have that, leaders are responsible for creating their own slides in the deck. And then my EA, who's wonderful, will actually put it all together. And then we go. So that's how we do it.
Got it. Yeah. I think that's where a lot of people lose momentum, in my opinion, on all hands, is it gets too hard to produce, and there's no, and I think you got to get into that rhythm. And once you do, though, it's super powerful.
I think it's having the right co-founders, and especially my co-founders, Tim, Mike, Mark, and Matt, that are equally committed to the vision and succeeding and bringing our vision to life. Because I think I've found at G2 and all entrepreneurial ventures, it always gets harder and always takes longer. And so having co-founders that are equally in it with you is what's really kept me going and I think made us successful.
Do you think there's something about the co-founder's skill set that you're looking for complementary skills, or is it just having people that are as dedicated as you are to the mission and the vision?
I think both. And G2 was our second company. Actually, I had 4 co-founders at G2, and we'd all work together building big machines, which we sold to Oracle. And so I knew I wanted different skills. And actually, I started with Mark Myers. He was our chief design officer, because frankly, I felt like my prior company, we kind of lost our way on UX and design. And we wanted G2 to be consumer site, for software buying. So we said, hey, design's got to be central. So Mark was the first guy I recruited. Then I recruited Matt Gorniak, and he was our head of sales at Big Machines as our kind of CRO go-to-market. And he was really the best at that, I'd ever seen build big machines with me. And then we recruited our best young engineer, Mike Wheeler, as our CTO, because we knew we needed a very hands-on coder to really, build a platform. And I recruited Tim Handorf as our head of product. He was also head of product at the first company. And, knew that I really wanted a strong head of product. And then actually at one point I wound up at G2 turning over the CEO reins to Tim, because he was also an excellent team builder, team leader. And when I look back now, what made G2 successful in the early days and allowed G2 to persevere, even when I went off to build another company, Steelbrick, was, having that founding team and having them so committed to bringing the vision to life.
So for me, as I think about the next company, and I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do next, there is something about those people that you've worked with before where you almost don't have to say anything to them. You know, it's like when you watch people playing some sport and they've played with each other for years and they know where the other person's going to be and they can put the ball right there. You know, it feels like that's what you've been able to do with G2 and with these co-founders, right? Because you basically brought together people who have worked together before. You knew that there was that chemistry. Do you feel like the speed at which you could move was significantly faster because of that?
Yeah, I think when you have a dialed-in team, especially also the trust. And David, as you know, the early days are very stressful, and there's also a lot of strong opinions which direction to go in. I think one of our strengths, we trust each other, so we could debate like crazy. You know, one of our founding mantras was discourse it, and we basically debated everything. You know, but I think we had that mutual trust that we could debate, get mad at each other, you know, but still come back the next day and realign to a common vision. And so I think it's both, like having complementary skills and being a dialed in team, but I think that trust and then also that commitment, you know, because like I said, I think every venture goes through valleys of despair. And that's probably been all my entrepreneurial journeys. Like G2, you start with this vision and for a couple months, it's like euphoric, you know, we're going to do everything better. And then I remember at G2, like 2 months in, we just launched our alpha site and then we're like, oh shit, we have no web traffic. You know, and we're not getting any reviews. It's like, what do we do? You know, and then I think if we hadn't had each other, we probably would have just quit.
I would say that is ROB, so rhythm of business. And so the idea here is to create the most predictable year possible from the outset. I think about it like a school calendar, right? So there are a few parts to that, really two key parts to that. One is the major events for the year and the minor events for the year. Right, so the major events, think about it as any fundraising meetings or important meetings with investors, board meetings, conferences, customer conferences, quarterly business reviews. And then there's minor events that sort of sit in between those major tentpoles for the year. So think about the stand-ups that you run, the executive meetings that are happening on a weekly or bi-weekly, monthly basis, functional meetings across, you know, go-to-market or product or so forth, and then cross-functional meetings that you create between different teams. So I think that once you have that rhythm of the business, trying to really establish it from the beginning so that everybody understands what's coming throughout the year, eliminate some of the ambiguity that we all live with, right? And then decide carefully on what are the expectations for each one of those different major or minor events, right? So what's the content we have to have for those events? What's the prep we have to do? What kind of meeting is it? Is it a decision-making meeting? Is it a brainstorming meeting? Those sorts of things. And then being very, very determined as the CEO to keep and enforce whatever rules you set for those events so that you are the pacemaker for what should be happening at those events. I see this as bringing a few different benefits. One is clarity. So reducing the ambiguity, as I mentioned. The second is mobilizing the team. So making sure that you can empower the leaders, send the right messages throughout the organization. That leads me to the third one, which is alignment. So you want to make sure that strategy and execution are aligned. And then finally, it's execution. So when you look at the rhythm of the business, it creates important forcing functions throughout the year. Right. So if you have a really important meeting that everybody is aware of that is happening in October or that is happening after the board meeting or whatever it is, you can create a function to drive urgency throughout the business. And it's really, really powerful to create that cadence and ramp up the pace in that way for the organization, because we have to be delivering with urgency in technology. Right. So.
There's so much in there that I mean, first of all, the forcing function, I think that is underappreciated, actually, how powerful there is when you have that forcing function, like you said, a board meeting, a big customer meeting, something like that. It's actually amazing the power that can have when people know they're working towards something, not just a random date, they're working towards. I love that. I have a very specific question there. How often can you have that type of forcing function? I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, can you do that every week and say, like, this Friday we have a big meeting, got to, hustle? Like, how often can you do that?
Yeah, it's a really good point. You have to be careful not to overuse it necessarily, right? But, we are all told when we're working in disruptive technology to move fast, right? To move with urgency, to drive forward results. And sometimes that isn't necessarily enough to bring the team together around a common goal or a common time frame. So I would agree, you have to not be over judicious with it. You not necessarily do it every single time. But I think like some 2 or 3 major forcing functions a year, along with some minor deadlining that can be tied to an event, is very effective.
When you talk about the rhythm of the business, you talk about setting these major, minor events throughout the year. How much does that change throughout the year? Or are you, do you miss these meetings? Like, do you ever skip a meeting or cancel it? Or are you, is this pretty strict?
There's always things that happen throughout the course of running a business that may preclude you from having one of these meetings take place. So you have to be reasonably flexible, but ideally you really are not making too many changes to the rhythm of the business that you've established. And I think as you mature, you're able to establish that cadence and those meetings more and more into the future, right? Maybe at the beginning, you can't quite do it for the whole year. You can only do it for maybe 1 or 2 quarters. Maybe you do it on a quarterly basis or biannual basis. It changes. I think the other really interesting thing is that the events themselves evolve over time. So I mentioned when you want to develop the right expectations, the content, the prep, the type of meetings that you're having, you can determine that, hey, maybe during the ELT meeting that we have every week, from now on, we want to do it with a memo beforehand, right? We want to have a memo, and you evolve it. You can evolve it at the beginning of the year when you establish the new ROB for that year, or you can do it midway if you find that that's going to drive a particular objective. So I think it's important to treat them as sacredly as possible, so not manipulate the calendar too much, but also to have the right level of flexibility to assess if you're getting the most out of the meetings, and also if they need to be rescheduled for some inevitability, then you can do that.
Who owns the rhythm of the business? Is it you as CEO, or is it somebody else in the business? Who owns that?
I think it has to be owned by the CEO and enabled by other teams. That I think it also depends on scale, right? At the beginning, you may not have an office of the CEO to help you really create a rock solid ROB that's very predictable. So you may have to do that on your own and dedicate the time to it and prepare for those meetings yourself. As you grow, you have an admin staff that can help you. I find that oftentimes also the people team is well equipped and well positioned, has good visibility of what's going on amongst the teams to facilitate some of that ROB work stream. But I think it changes over time. Ultimately, it should roll up to you. Ultimately, you should have the full sign off on what the ROB looks like and be very intimately aware of it, because it can be an extremely powerful mechanism to drive results.
Do you have, as you talked about the different meetings, are there different voices heard in those meetings? Is it always your voice and you're the one kind of leading that stuff, or do you have different voices heard in those meetings?
It's definitely not intended to be a soapbox that I stand on and speak for an hour or half an hour. It's really meant to be, as much as possible, I want the meetings to be collaborative, and everybody has a role to play in the meeting to either, kind of thinking about it from a racy standpoint. Is somebody responsible? Are they accountable? Are they consulted? Are they influencers in this meeting? And sort of thinking about who you bring together. But ideally, you're either making decisions in a meeting or you're brainstorming and solving problems together that can then be input into a decision. Trying to avoid as much as possible reading the news, right? You don't necessarily always just want to come in with here are my updates. If I try when we have our ELT meetings to make them as cross-functional as possible. We are bringing topics that we as a team can address together uniquely in this particular forum, right? And so I think it's really not meant to be, a megaphone for me. It's meant to be more of an opportunity for either cross-functional alignment and collaboration, or team working sessions, or of course a board meeting, which is its own thing.
one of the interesting things that I found over the years is I would change the rhythm of the business, probably not even quarterly, more like monthly, and it became hard for people to anchor to anything. It's like, oh, we're having all hands meetings every week, and then it was, oh no, we're having them every month. Nope, every 2 weeks, every 2 months, and it was. And I think that one of the benefits when you talk about the whole year, actually, I don't think we ever did the full year, is if you can get to that point, people know there's some certainty to know what's coming, when they're going to get the information, and they're not waiting to find out. All of a sudden, you just put an all hands on the calendar and people start freaking out. People know these are the things that are coming. I really, I like that. As the team, does the team ever actually communicate that back to you? Like, people on the team, do they say that, or do you feel that?
Oh, the team pushes you to do it once you start doing it. I think the team pushes you to do it further and further out into the future, right? Because people have got other commitments outside of work that they want to be able to plan, and they want to be if you're doing the right things and these meetings are productive, they want to be a part of them, right? So they want to attend, they want to be there, they want to contribute. And so in order to make sure that you can maximize attendance, right? People say, hey, do we know when, the kickoff for the year is happening? And this is like in the middle of the summer. It's like, yeah, well, the ROB is going to be released shortly. You'll have the full visibility into all the different events. And again, I don't believe it's possible to necessarily do it when you start a business, to do this so far out into the future, because it's hard. You have to sort of have a couple of reps at it before you can determine what works for you, right? What works with your fiscal year, what works with the different teams you have as you grow and scale. Maybe you got to deprecate some meetings. Maybe you have to spin new ones up. So it's something that you should constantly be iterating on and keeping an eye on. But I agree, it's making sure that you can be as consistent as possible, and then progressively planning further and further out over the year becomes something that the team, yes, embraces and appreciates.
Being comfortable not being liked, or having all of your decisions liked and agreed with. I think when I first started the Muse, we were a small team. There was a lot of consensus. We were really mission oriented. But as the company scales, the business gets more complicated, the team gets bigger, and suddenly I, as CEO, had access to a lot of information that not everybody had. Sometimes they couldn't know it, or in one case, even legally, we were prohibited from talking about terms of a deal. And all of a sudden, everybody has an opinion about the decisions you make. And there was a period of time at the beginning where I found that to be a bit crippling. Once I got over it and realized that you can't make everybody happy, you have to act in line with your own principles and with high integrity. But whether people like your decision or not, that's not something you can control. It was really freeing. It was a really important part of becoming a better CEO.
One other CEO that we talked to, they said that for them, it was about being unapologetic. They felt like that was the thing where, and I have gone through similar, I think it's a personality thing of like, who are you as a person? There are some CEOs, I think we know them, who don't care, like really don't care about how they're viewed or if people like them or whatever. And I think if there's a personality, probably like you, probably like me, that you want people to want to follow you and enjoy being at the company, and and you can almost make it, I don't know, maybe too much of a democracy, when you're in that mode. And at least for me, I think when you're a first time founder, it's probably maybe even worse that you're leaning towards that.
Completely. I had an exec pull me aside at one point and say, please just make the decision. People would rather be frustrated at you because you didn't pick the choice they wanted than either have to make that choice themselves or stay in this in between with no choice. And it was actually clarifying. He was giving me permission to pick one, commit to it, and move forward. And of course, sometimes you're wrong. So you've got to be really open to that feedback. Sometimes there's a solution that either can't satisfy every team, every department, or there's data that not everyone knows. So there was a point early in the Muse's life where we had the opportunity to make an amazing deal, hugely beneficial for the company. And we got it at a unbelievably attractive price, but on the condition legally that it was confidential. This is fairly common. And somehow a rumor started that we had paid like $1 million for whatever. Anyway, it's a longer story, but there was a lot of whispering. And while I did address it head on and say, look, the rumors aren't true, I also was not able. I even actually went to the other party in the contract and said, could I share XYZ? And they were like, no. So there are times when you just have to accept that not everyone's going to be happy. And I think, again, yeah, for someone that really cares about others, ultimately, I do want people to be happy. Sometimes for me, it was also as simple as having the direct conversation. I remember actually reading a parenting book that my brother recommended. I don't have kids, but my brother has an amazing daughter. And he recommended a parenting book that had this strategy, 2 things are true. And it was about how to talk to kids. But I remember once an executive came and they were frustrated about a decision I made. And for whatever reason, I had just read that chapter in the book. I was like, I think 2 things are true here. You would have made a different decision. You're frustrated about the decision I made. And I can't change the decision. I'm standing by it. And they were like, well, thank you for saying that I'm frustrated. I just really wanted you to know, I don't think that was the call that I would have made. And I was like, I hear that. It was a really hard decision. I fully respect that. And thank you for sharing your opinion. And, it sounds silly in a way. Now I'm repeating it now, but it actually diffused a lot of the situation, just letting them be angry and accepting that that was okay.
What I find when you say that about the executive, one of the things that I think about is stories and experiences that I had where really strong executives, people I trusted a lot, would challenge me on these things and same answer, hey, I have to make a decision. This is my decision. And actually for a couple of them, it kept escalating where those conversations got more and more contentious. And at one point I actually said to one of them, I'm not even saying your decision is wrong and mine is right, but I am the CEO and I have to be the one to make a decision. I'm the one who has to live with it ultimately. And I told him, I said, you need to go and be a CEO because it feels like you're at that point. And I've had a number of people who worked with me and worked for me who have gone on to do that. And everyone, no exaggeration, will call me within 6 months and say, that conversation, I now understand what you're saying.
What's so funny is as you started telling this story, I was thinking of 3 different people that I had this exact situation, or have come and found me later and say, it is so much harder and so different being in the seat and making the calls than I realized. I'm so sorry. In one case, I had somebody be like, I am so sorry. I was such a pain in your ass. And I was like, look, you had a position, you believed in it. Like, I loved the way that you advocated for it. And at the end of the day, not everybody gets to make the decision. And I think, that's one of the things I also think is important about being a CEO is knowing when do you allow the discussion and the dissension, because it's vitally important to allow it for a period of time. I think it's very dangerous. And I would say, I think it's a poor way to lead, not to encourage and support people disagreeing with you, people raising challenges, people contradicting. And at some point, you sometimes also have to shut it down and say, now this is the decision. And we had a point in the Muse's life where we debated internally whether to become more of like a purely B2B SaaS product. We had essentially a marketplace with employers on one side, 20% of the Fortune 500 at our peak, and 70 million job seekers on the other. But there was an opportunity we had to potentially really go into deep B2B SaaS without any sort of consumer component. We debated it, frankly, probably for too long, but it was my first time as CEO. I really wanted to hear people out. And when I made the call, when we doubly committed to being a marketplace, we had an executive who would not get on board and just kept bringing up the other plan. And ultimately, I had to tell them that they either needed to get on board or leave the company. And I was like, look, if you want to, it's a bit similar. If you want to make this call, you can go be a CEO or found a company, but this is the company that I'm running today, and this is the call we're making, and we need people to get on board. And it was actually much easier to operate after that.
Do you think it's different or harder if you're a CEO who's a woman versus a man? Like, do you?
Yeah. definitely. And I think it's interesting. There's been a lot of research in academia, in a variety of business contexts, that people expect likability from women leaders in a way that they don't necessarily from men. And we can probably think of 20 examples in the pop culture. You can be a guy and I don't know, can I say like kind of a dick? But people will be like, oh, but he's so smart. He's decisive. We have all of these attributes that I think we sometimes allow men to be very complicated in ways that that women get really punished for. So yeah, I have this conversation, frankly, all the time with female founders, frankly, women execs in general, where they do feel like I feel like there's a bit less tolerance of anything that seems because I think culturally we often still want women to be really caring, really kind, really likable. I believe I'm all those things, but I also have to make hard calls to run a business. And people punish women more when they perceive those things are in conflict, even though, as we've talked about, sometimes the company doesn't have all the information. Sometimes there are situations at a board level with investors, with a customer, sometimes legally, that only a very small group of people have access to. And it can be really hard when, you feel like every call is being judged, but that's also part of the job.
Okay, so this is really fresh for me because we have 2 quarters completed at Fullcast. And what we've done is dive in deep into the persona of our customer and the ICP. So not just saying, okay, this is the type of customer, this is who we're selling to, but really deeply understanding them. So let me give you some examples. Let's see, I've talked to more than 60 VPs of RevOps in these 2 quarters. Here's a few things I learned. They're very responsive between about 10 and midnight. They're the hardest working people. They're unsung heroes. You think about when you hit the revenue mark, the CRO usually sees credit. When you are efficient and you're a machine and you hit the EBITDA mark, the CFO usually gets credit. But the RevOps leader is the one that's putting together the strategy where the rubber meets the road from the board and the CEO. But they're really unsung heroes. So they don't get a lot of credit for all the production they create within an organization and efficiencies. The other thing that's interesting is it's still new enough that there's a lot of debate about who they should report to. So I started surveying and asking them, who do you report to? Well, about half of them are to the CRO. And then you have about 15% to 20% to the COO. And you have 15 to 20% to the CFO. And then you have this emergence of the chief commercial officer. So where they report, the scope of the departments they touch is changing too. From, are they just influencing ops from sales, marketing? Are they involved with product, customer success? So there's so much I'm learning and diving deep into the minds of our RevOps leaders that I feel like I almost feel like I've become one of them over the last couple quarters. And I feel so much more capable of speaking to them, selling to them, and providing products and services that they really need, because I have put my heart and soul into understanding how they operate and what they think about.
Wow. And when you do these meetings, is it always one-on-one with them, or is it group settings? Or
I try to make it one-on-one. If it's a group setting in like a dinner, I will make a point to move around the table and I will say, hey, I want to make sure, and I'll state to everybody, I want to make sure I get one-on-one time with every one of you. And then I will make my way around the table and move and play musical chairs, because I want to make sure that I have that precious one-on-one time. And I think right now, if anybody's really honest, what's moving business forward is that one-on-one committed time. That's how it's happening.
And when you have these meetings, are you somehow taking that information and returning it back to the company at large, or the executive team?
Absolutely. And it's really fun because I've been able to share that in company meetings, in my messages, and then in our executive meetings. And I've been using the AI note takers and getting the information back to the team and to the product team, and to the point where
now I feel like when I get on the phone, I'm not just showing up as the CEO, but I'm showing up as a thought leader or somebody that can help be insightful and add value to the RevOps leader that I'm on the phone with.
You know, you and I talked about this. I love this. I mean, I always talk about one of the most impactful things I ever did at Better Cloud was when I met with 100 people in 100 days, 100 customers in 100 days, one-on-one, like you're talking about. And it was so powerful, but I found it energizing and exhausting, you know, at the same time. And I think to what you said, like, there's no shortcut actually to this. You have to make the time and the energy and really connect with that buyer and that customer. And I think people try shortcuts to this. Oh, we'll survey a bunch of people, we'll do a dinner, and I'll talk to 10 people at the dinner. Now I know the customer. It's impressive really when you take the time, and I'm sure for the team it shows how much you, to the customer for sure, it shows how much you care, and to the team as well.
Yeah, and I would say that the time that I had, I would typically have a propensity to focus it on insular into the business, right? And to be focused on how I can be helpful to the organization as an operating CEO. And I think there's a propensity not to pause things and to do that, but it will make you so much sharper as a CEO and the value you add to your leadership team, to your company. Because like you said, you're now insightful. You're now an expert on what your customer needs. Instead of guessing or flying blind, I think it takes a lot of arrogance to, as a CEO, not to take the time to deeply understand those customers. You're really flying by the seat of your pants if you don't really understand them.
How did the customers respond when you asked them for this time, or these RevOps leaders? How did they respond?
You know, what was interesting is I think at first they're wondering, why was I wanting the time? And honestly, did I want something? And this is a big deal to me. I think there's a propensity in business right now for people to be impatient and to ask for too much too soon. And I once heard that if in new relationships, if you just give for the first year, it's so transformational for the long-term relationship. And so when I get on the phone, I'm trying to figure out, how do I help their career? And I'm sending them all swag. I'm trying to figure out, what can I do to add value to their lives and to them, and showing that I truly want to understand their job and I care. It's made a huge difference versus, I think, some CEOs, and this is really when a CRO gets involved with customers too soon, a lot of times they're asking too much and they're running the relationship thin. And so I've made a concentrated effort to give back to them and to show them that I'm not on the line. I think people are almost coming leery when a leader asks for a call like that, like, oh, what are they going to ask me for?
For us, when we started the business, we were really in the weeds. And I think this expression of like getting in the weeds has almost like a negative connotation. But we bootstrapped the beginning of our business, which meant that for Crafty, as an office food and beverage provider, we were delivering kegs and we were delivering food and beverage to offices. We were picking orders at the warehouse. We were buying from suppliers. We were doing everything. And, there's this expression of like scaling your business. You have to be able to scale. And what we were doing was extremely unscalable. We were not hiring people. We were literally doing the operation end to end, every single detail, every single job. And I remember it was really hard. Like, it's really, really hard. I almost felt like, especially because I was working in consulting before that, to go from like a white collar, work environment where the toughest, manual labor was my fingers bashing on keys all day, making PowerPoints and Excel models, to literally operating, a 16-foot box truck and trying to do that while, running the business. It was really difficult, but there was I remember listening to, I think it was like a How I Built This podcast. I'm driving this 16-foot box truck in Chicago, and I'm listening to podcasts of other entrepreneurs trying to learn what it takes to be successful as an entrepreneur. And I'm listening to the Instacart founder. And I think he got the question of like, so how many deliveries did you do when you started Instacart? He's like, I mean, I did like one, maybe like a ride along, but like, why would I do the deliveries? And I'm literally driving a truck, listening to this, thinking I must be an idiot to want to be in all the details. And myself and all of my co-founders were like that. But if on the next one, which, I hope at some point there is another one, and I will absolutely take the same approach again of getting into the details, trying to understand and build empathy for every detail of the operation before it's too late. Because when you get to a certain scale, it's actually harder to try to get into the details of everything. When the company's bigger, there's more jobs, there's more people, there's more layers. So having that, detailed foundation, I think has helped me build empathy and understanding of everything that happens in our business.
What was the first job you stopped doing?
Well, I was never, Jimmy, who's our CTO, was always, developing the product. So I was never truly developing the product. So from a software engineering perspective, that was not something I was doing. But I would say of a job that I was doing that we got away from, delivery. It was the first thing. And it was something where as you're scaling, you hire one driver and then that driver doesn't work out or they call in sick. And so you're hopping back in. And we had even third parties that did some deliveries early, and we would have to go in, fix things, and constantly be in the operation. But the delivery component was the first component that we aimed to take out from underneath our direct responsibilities, so we could focus on other components of growing our business.
When you said this to me, when we were talking about this, and I was like, I feel like it's one of the most underrated attributes of the best founders who really do understand every job, whether it's one founder or a set of founders, because then when you start hiring people, you really do understand the work that they're doing. They may be more expert at it than you, they may be better at it than you, but at least you can have a conversation with them and really have credibility. I would also say have credibility and respect from them to say, oh, you did this job that you're hiring me for. You're not just that's a big, I think that's a really big deal, especially when you're talking about physical labor. That I'd say the Instacart example is probably the case for most companies that involve the physical attributes. The CEO is the founder that's sitting there doing their emails and but not actually getting their hands dirty. And I think it makes I would believe it makes a big difference to even the following you get from those early employees.
It helps me empathize with the work that they do day in and day out, because now I'm not doing deliveries. And so as we scale up our operation, there's a credibility piece that I have that I think if, company gets bigger, you worry about sort of like ivory tower leadership and just getting too far away from the work that's being done and losing sight truly of the work that's being done and getting further away from the customer. I mean, all of these risks that you have to solve for as the company grows. Like I remember you telling me about how you did 100 client conversations in 100 days because you got to a point where you're like, I don't feel as close as I used to feel to the customer. I need to get back in there. It's those tactics that require those things that help you be more impactful and effective. If you still keep a pulse on the business, there's a lot of there's this idea of the founder versus the manager. There's like the founder CEO, and then there's the CEO for hire. And the thing that the founder always has is that experience, of truly knowing what it took to get to that point of knowing the operation at a detailed level. I mean, that's so valuable. And I don't want to lose that. Even as the company grows.
Let me ask you a question, because I will say from my own mistakes over multiple companies, I would hire executives, and I almost when I would hire them, my assumption was this person is too senior to get in the weeds and do the job. And they're an executive and they came from this place and I'm paying them all this money. But as I reflect on 20 years of working with other executives, non-founders, I've realized that there's a big need actually for everyone who joins to get in the weeds and do the job at least once, twice, 3 times so that they understand it. Is that something you see? Is that something you've done, at Crafty as you've brought on non-founder leaders?
Oh yeah. And I think it might be tied to seniority. It might not be. Like you might hire a leader who's not super senior in their career, but their style is that they want to be sort of outside of the work.
It's a good point.
And, we've hired some very senior leaders who have and are extremely effective because they're in the work. They're truly, they lead from the front. And I think it just helps them ramp, especially when you're joining a company as a new leader. You got to learn the business. And if you're in 6 months, 9 months, and you don't actually know elements of how things are operating at that point, I mean, that's a telltale sign of somebody who's not really getting into the work and they're just trying to, manage. And I don't think for a startup, that's an effective leadership hire. I think especially for early stage businesses, like you got to hire. And I think for every stage, probably this is true, but can't speak to like massive companies. But yeah, just hiring people who want to do the work. They focus on the work. I mean, that's the most important piece. The one thing that as you were asking that original question of like, what did you give up? The one thing I didn't give up for a while and still kind of like hold close is the client relationship, through sales and through client success. And that's the thing where I think because I've been able to do a lot of different things in the company, it's helped me as a seller. But it's a tough gap when you're like so into being and selling Crafty to then have to hire leaders and build out the team, like shifting from founder-led sales to non-founder-led sales was really difficult. But that was the one thing that I was like really slow to give up. I didn't want to give it up. And I haven't given up. I'm still involved, but we've got a fantastic sales leader, sales team, sales infrastructure, and I'm way less involved at this point. But there were things that I was more quick to probably give up. And there were things that I was really holding on to intentionally, for better or for worse.
I think one of the things that, including again myself and I've talked about this, like as time goes on, you do feel like you need to step out of things like sales and get in the sales leader and everything. But actually, as you scale, and as I talk to founders of larger companies, they're always involved in sales. Now, maybe they're only involved now in the bigger and bigger and bigger sales processes. They're no longer involved in the day-to-day kind of core high velocity deals, but pretty much every founder that I've spoken to, even at hundreds of millions of ARR, they're still involved. They're just involved in a different kind of level of deal.
Definitely. It's important to know yourself and know your skills and like where your strengths are and what you're sort of attracted to doing. Because you should focus on the things you really love to do. But at the same time, like if you are a technical founder and you don't love selling, I think you got to push yourself to sell, as much as possible. You got to push yourself to be in front of the client, to engage, even if it's uncomfortable, because of how much value you get from those conversations, from what's said, from what's not said, body language, reactions. Like you really miss out on a lot if you're not engaging with the clients. And so there's different pieces where I think, yeah, you want to play to your strengths, but when it comes to engaging with the client, whether you're comfortable or excited about that or not, you got to do it.
It's a great question. And I'd have to go way back. I think it was, we started the company in 2009, and we had started to get to a size and scale where we had to start to write down vision, mission, values, where we couldn't just kind of lead from the front and have it happen. I'd say it was probably 2011. And my co-founder and I, were committed to putting this stuff on paper. And I think I pulled an all-nighter and I wrote down our core values.
And the acronym is GRIT, which I think stands for a lot in and of itself. And I know we'll talk a little bit about the experience kind of navigating Convene through the pandemic, which is really an existential crisis for us. But, GRIT is genuine, relentless integrity, teamwork. And at the same time, we also wrote this kind of philosophy, which to me is really a life philosophy of 1% better each day. And that's this constant improvement, almost Kaizen type mindset that, I think my co-founder and I had as humans, and really wanted to bring that to an organization. And, I'd say of the many important things I feel like we've done, as a team and as an organization, committing to writing those values down on paper was probably one of the most, I'd say, transformational and really an inflection point. And, if I look at the business today and the success that we've had, I would say it's been staying religiously true to that core value system in everything that we do, from the way that we hire to the way that we engage with our clients, to how we interact with our partners, to how we deal with challenging situations, which, for any startup founder and CEO or management team scaling a business, those things always happen. And so I'd say that of it all, that would be, I'd say, probably the most important thing that, we and I did.
I have so many questions on this. You've kept the same values for over a decade. Have you ever felt the need to change it, or kind of thinking like, hey, they don't really represent who we are now that I think you're 1,000 people maybe today?
Yeah, just under 1,000 people.
So like, have you ever thought about changing them, or that's just this has been?
No, I would say our mission statement, our vision statement, our principles, I think like most companies, as you evolve and the market evolves and the opportunity set evolves, I think you're always tweaking that. I think as a founder, you have a vision. I call it like the front of the puzzle box. And I think you have a vision of what is possible and where you want to go, but it gets clearer as you get close to the destination. And then you also find these amazing new destinations that you want to go to. So I would say we've rewritten like our mission and vision statement, I don't know how many times over the last 15 years. We've definitely rewritten the About Us Convene section of our website and boilerplate and LinkedIn, I don't know how many times. But thankfully, the core values is something that, we've never had to go back and really revisit. And I think it says a lot, like, genuine. Like, what does that mean? Well, that means to be authentic. That means to be authentic as a brand, authentic as a business. It means to be authentic as individuals, especially, in the hospitality business. I've always been a huge fan of Danny Meyer, and, I read his book, Setting the Table, early on. And it was really clear to me that the ethos and philosophy of Union Square's approach to hospitality was, let's hire amazing people that are compassionate, that care. And let's let them bring their genuine, authentic selves to deliver that experience. Like, let's not put them in a set uniform, and let's not give them the Ritz-Carlton script that they need to say. Like, and so I think this idea of genuine and authenticity is something that, I think has served us well. Relentless. Like, David, as a founder and CEO, so much of success is like, don't give up, don't quit, keep pushing, right? And, it's been amazing for me to see. And, I think we all got spoiled for a very long period of time, especially in the startup ecosystem. Easy to raise money, easy to get a customer to pilot with you, easy to go get $1 of revenue. And I think any founder and CEO you talk to today knows that that's not the world we live in anymore. And I think all of us, we got tested in the pandemic in a certain way, but I think every founder today, especially those that are out, trying to fundraise, like there's a certain tenacity and resilience that is now required because it is not easy. And so I think this idea of being resilient has definitely served us well. Integrity, like do the right thing, period. And, I think especially in the industry that I'm in, real estate, finance, it's easy to cut corners and to maybe tell yourself that you're doing the right thing, but you're really angling. And for us, we always wanted to be open, honest, transparent, fair, and, be able to put our head on the pillow at night, not just as individuals and leaders, but as a business. And then lastly, I grew up playing a lot of team sports, and business is the greatest team sport in the world, especially in a hospitality company. Every single person in this organization, whether you're in the corporate office, senior management, or you're working in one of our kitchens, the experience that we're delivering to our clients, you cannot do alone. And I'd say that element of teamwork and this idea of like we win and we lose together, I think has really served us well. And, is one of the reasons that, I think we were able to navigate ourselves through, an existential event in the pandemic and not just survive, but come out thriving. Our business, we were killing it before the pandemic, in the process of closing a pre-IPO equity round, profitable, metrics were incredible. And, we're a bigger business today than we were heading into the pandemic. And, I think, again, that's a testament to the team staying true to who we were, these core values, and being very, very relentless and resilient.
So the values are like you just went through. I mean, timeless, especially for your kind of business. So it makes sense. You've kept them in place over a decade. Now the next question is, how do you interview for those values? Do you have a dedicated team that does values interviews? I've heard that. Do you, from other people, is it just in the interview, in the, wherever they have to put the feedback and it's got each value? Like, how do you interview for these values?
Every organization, I think, has what they would define as like their high bar when bringing talent into their organization. And if I was interviewing at Google, it's going to be probably very driven around like my technical capability, right? As an engineering culture, the technical capability is going to be really, really important, right? Because as an organization, that's like one of their core competencies and differentiators. For Convene, as like a hospitality company, we're in the human to human delivery of service experience business. We're in the people business. And so as part of our interview process, we've built our questions, and when our interviewers are filling out their post-interview feedback, there's certain questions that they're asking, and they actually do like a grit score of each individual candidate. And one of the questions that, and I ask this question in every interview that I do, especially of senior leaders, but really anytime I get to interview anyone, and it's an open-ended question, but I think it says a lot about a person, which is, what is the most challenging thing you've had to go through in your life? And how has that shaped who you are, what you believe, and what you want to accomplish in your life? And the responses I've gotten in that question says a lot. My mom died when I was a kid. I had cancer. Like, you name it, you get it. And I think you learn a lot about who a person is as a human in the response to that question. And also how self-actualized and reflective are they? And, to me, it also says like grit, resiliency, adaptability. And that's one of my favorite interview questions.
I like that. I like that a lot. That's a really good question, because you do learn a lot about you probably learn a lot about their drive. What is it that's
100%, especially in a startup environment, right? A high growth company. We always try, and I was our former chief people officer and COO, who is amazing, Amy Poozer. When she came, she said, "Look, we have to hire for growth company DNA." And I'm like, "Well, what is growth company DNA?" Well, she said, "Well, think about it. In a growth company, you're always writing the playbook. You don't inherit a playbook. You're writing a playbook. You're constantly calling audibles. And there's a difference between people that run playbooks and build playbooks. And in a growth company, in a startup company, it's not black and white. It's always gray. And having people that are adaptable, resilient, curious, self-reliant, don't need to be told what to do, see a problem, try and come up with a solution. That's kind of what you need in those environments to be successful, because those environments require that type of mindset and skill set. And so not only are we looking for grit and those core values, but also a person that is comfortable living in some sort of ambiguity and in what I would say is kind of a constant state of change. And look, as humans, we don't really love change, but in a startup high growth environment, that's all you're dealing with every day. And I think we've gotten really good through the recruiting process and the way we've built our employee facing brand and our employer brand, as well as in the interview process of really starting to not just attract and retain those types of people, but also understanding kind of how to structure the interview process to make sure, let's say our hit ratio is higher and we're making good hiring decisions.
The one thing we do, in fact, we just had one this morning, but we try to over communicate with the teams, and particularly with teams distributed all around the world. Like, it's super, super important for us to over communicate with them and to like really explain everything we're doing. When I was at my very first CEO job back in 2001, I walk into this all hands meeting, and it was clear to me that those employees had no idea the dire straits that company was in, right? It was clear to me that like the leaders who preceded me had not shared the reality of the situation with them. And then I had to be the bearer of bad news and the reality check. And if you were recollections of 2001 was pretty grim time, right? Like, companies were going under nonstop. So I kind of like vowed then, man, I'm going to always tell the truth. I'm going to always over communicate. I may not be able to answer every question, but I'm never going to like delude the team. Right. And I look at it as, as an employee, you have one bet, like where you plan to put your work effort are the chips you're putting on the table. So like, if I'm investing my pile of chips into this company, like, you got to tell me how my investment's doing. Like, I got to know how we're doing. So I've kind of always taken that, and I was always shocked that other people didn't do that. So we do this thing called user manuals, which I learned from my friend David Politis, where every single person, when they get hired, they write what's called a user manual, and they answer a number of questions of what their work styles are, a little bit about their background, so you can understand where they're coming from. Really humanize people. Like when you understand someone's background, and like they say, like I came from a very, I don't know, like a very challenged, poor background. Therefore, I'm very tight with budget. Hey, that helps you understand when your budget isn't just getting blindly approved by this person. Like, things like that are super helpful. So I will always over communicate. I will always have open forums. I will always do the user manuals, and always encourage our team to be as kind of like honest and open as possible as well. But like, like, that doesn't mean someone can just walk in and be like, tell me absolutely everything, or are we thinking of doing some strategic acquisitions or anything? Like, we're obviously not going to give away state secrets in this, but we try to be pretty forthcoming.
So now Dialpad, I think, is 1,000 people or maybe over.
About 1,300, yeah.
1,300. So at 1,300 people, and you have offices around the world, literally.
Yeah.
How do you? That's a lot of people to speak to at one time. Is it all at the same time? Everyone together? Is it recorded and distributed? Like tactically, how do you actually do that?
Yeah, tactically. So we have offices. We have offices in kind of like the Western Hemisphere time zone where it works, and offices that don't. Right. So we have folks in Argentina, folks in the Bay Area, Phoenix, Austin, Texas, Vancouver, British Columbia, and Kitchener Waterloo, which is north of Toronto. That group kind of sees the live, like what we did this morning, an hour once a month to talk about stuff. We now do a PM version, or we do a PM version at 9:00 tonight that I get to do again tonight at 9:00. And then our team from India, our team from London, our team from, well, in London's tough. Like London was actually on this morning. They could go either way. Team from Japan, team from Manila, they're all on that evening one. Team from Sydney. So we kind of do it twice. We try not to record them. I wish we could, but we give out too much kind of like financial information that we don't want possibility of a recording to get out. But you just got to be really intentional. And the other thing that I do is like, I'll travel around and host it from.
Oh, I like that.
Sites. So today was like the first time in 4 months that I've done it from headquarters. Like last month I was in Denver where our customer success org is. The month before that I was in Austin for the end of the quarter at the end of July. Month before that I was in Tempe or Phoenix where our other sales office is. Then I'll go up to Vancouver. I haven't been there in a while. I got to get up there. I haven't been to Argentina in a while. It's a heavy trek to get down there, but it's worth it. You just got to kind of do those things. And then, I'm heading out to Manila to see the team in the Philippines. And you just got to kind of like personally invest the time to go make those offices feel that they're loved, supported, appreciated, that they're important, and that they're not, just on the far side of the world and out of sight, out of mind.
And I think specifically from knowing you and seeing you speak and seeing you with your team and everything, you definitely have that kind of, you probably bring that energy to those offices when you're there. So when you leave, people are kind of operating with that energy for months after you're there.
Hope so. Yeah. I mean, like as a founder, who else can tell the story, and get them excited. Like, here's why we did it. Let me tell you about the early days. And everyone wants to be part of something bigger than just a paycheck, right? So if you can like help share that narrative and make them feel that, like it's funny, we were talking about it. We were talking about it in our Dialed In. We call it Dialed In. We were talking about it today, and like we had some goals around net new ARR, and I'm like, I'm sorry, like I don't wake up in the morning and get excited to get out of bed to go to efficiently increase our net new ARR. That doesn't do it for me. But if it's going and making business communications insanely great and showing a bunch of empathy for our coworkers and customers and partners, like that gets me out of bed. Like I'm excited for that. And like it's these little tweaks that, kind of as a founder, even though like I do want to like put together a team and be able to delegate virtually everything, not virtually everything, but a lot to them, you still got to always keep your hand on the tiller of like, make sure you're getting the messaging right, make sure people understand the mission and make sure they feel, the same connection. And I think founders do that better than anyone.
Yeah. It's the people, that's where the energy and the soul, I think, of the company, it's like you need to be in front of the team to show them that.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things that when you think of what you've done throughout the period of being a CEO, you probably want to repeat. But there was one item or one piece of my sort of nature and reality as being CEO that I will never forget again, or never and always repeat in other instances, and that's making sure that I am continuously transparent with our organization. And I do that through the form of sending a monthly email. By now, having been in this role for a little over 6 years, I've sent north of 70 emails to the company. Within those emails, I share quite a bit of information about the organization. Regularly, I tell them the state of the business financially, and I am fully transparent about the P&L at that point in time and sort of our state of the union in terms of the business up to that point in the year relative to other years and so forth. And then additionally, I add anecdotal information about the period that has passed. Most of the time, it's somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks that I take between each email that I send. But these are very comprehensive. They're lengthy. Some will say too comprehensive and lengthy, but I prefer to share more than less. And it's just kept people pretty attuned with what's the state of the business and what we're doing daily.
So every week, when you talk about these emails, do you write the emails yourself every week for 6 years? You write it yourself?
Yeah. So I do it on a monthly basis, and I write them completely on my own. I don't have any writer. I don't have anybody that suggests material. I feel like that has create authenticity in the emails. They see the good and the bad in the way that I depict where we are as a business. I do collect the data from data that we collect otherwise, such as our FP&A organization, our metrics associated with it as well. But I've put it all together on my own. I do allow my CMO at times to just make sure that it's written in a way that is English appropriate rather than a broken English, given the fact that I am not originally an English speaker, but otherwise it's all me.
Wow, Eddie. And you and I have talked about this in the past, my experience at Better Cloud Sherpas, like we've talked about these emails in the past. And one of the things that I personally, or I know a lot of CEOs get concerned about is like putting all that information into the hands of your employees in an email that's easily forwardable, or, are you concerned about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a legit concern, and transparency does come with a price, but I think the reward is greater than the risk. And so from a risk perspective, yes, it is forwardable. However, good solutions out there have allowed for monitoring of emails and data, and especially data leaks, especially from emails. So we have a pretty stringent rules in place and rules technology that supports those rules, that allows people to forward copy or do otherwise anything with material that we are sending internally. However, people could come up with creative ideas, print screen and such, and they could come up with ways to share that information. And to me, it all comes down to what I'm getting in return. And in return, I view the reward of tying folks and employees to our daily results or weekly results or monthly results as a more important aspect of sharing information, of being transparent, for the good and the bad, by the way. It's not always going to be great news. Greater than what I may be risking. At the end of the day, an organization like ours is 100% founded on our ability to execute in the marketplace. We're not rocket scientists. We're not delivering necessarily IP that is unique to a professional and managed services organization. We do good work, provide great service, and push other businesses forward through the technology that we implement or transform them to. And so I view whether we are $100 million, $200 million, $300 million, profitable, non-profitable, as a simple data point, no more than that. It doesn't tell our story. It doesn't share information about how we approach projects or how we do them necessarily. It simply suggests that we are today at scale and are able to sort of do the work that we're doing and the segments that we're doing, the verticals that we chose to participate in. That's why I like to share that information.
Yeah, there's so many things that I think go into building a business, building a great business, but it all starts with a team. And as a founder, you should know what you know, and you should know what you don't know. And I knew from the very beginning that I needed to bring on a co-founder and to bring on a CTO. What we were building was very technically complex and complicated. It was a big build. It's why we spent one of the many reasons we spent a lot of time, why we spent a lot of money building the product. And so I recruited my co-founder, Chris Ibarra, and it was kind of unconventional because we had never worked together before. And so I remember we talked about this. I talked to investors about this, and they kind of thought I was crazy to hire somebody or to co-found with somebody that I hadn't had work experience with before. But Chris was a great hire. And I think the process by which we got to know each other and made that decision together, I'd absolutely do again. And I think of all of the decisions we made at the company, many of which were not right, that was one that we really got right.
So I remember when you were going through that process and you were really you spent a lot of time talking to a number of people. And I remember even when you got to Chris and the references you were doing on Chris and the ones he was doing on you. And can you just talk maybe about that process? How long did that process take from beginning to end, for example?
Yeah, I mean, from when I left BetterCloud, where I work for you, to really starting the company was 6+ months. And I had the idea already. And most of that time was spent finding Chris. And I think one of I imagine this will resonate with you, but I think one of the things about your co-founder or those core members of your early team, in a lot of ways, that's much more of a marriage than it is a employee-employer relationship. And so that process feels in a lot of ways much more like dating than it does interviewing somebody. So of course I spent a lot of time. I probably spoke with 10 plus really good engineering leaders that I considered. And we spent a lot of time. I mean, there's an aspect of getting to know each other and feeling that there's personality fits, which is really important. Because you end up spending more time with your co-founder than kind of anyone else in your family. We ended up doing remotely for a number of reasons, including the fact that we got started during the pandemic. But you're spending more time with that person than your wife, than with your kids. If you don't like that person, well, if it works, you're going to spend 10, 15, 20 years. So I think we really approach it much more with a dating mindset than anything. And that was lots of sessions, getting to know each other, what motivated each other, interviewing each other. And then we spent time working together. And so before we made any type of formal decision to work together, at some point you've got good juju going with this person. You're like, well, let's see what actually happens. And so we spent a bunch of time actually in working sessions together over a couple of weeks, kind of trying before we bought. And so kind of all of that happened, and that took 2-3 months. And I had gotten introduced to Chris through the former VP of engineering at BetterCloud, actually. And so I hadn't worked with Chris before, but he was through a trusted, third party, right? A a trusted person that Chris and I had both worked with. So we spent a bunch of time getting to that point, and then we were kind of ready. And so we wanted to do even more diligence. So we did mutual references. So he gave me like 3 or 4 folks that he had worked for or worked with in the past, and I spoke with them, and then vice versa. And I think that was really, really helpful in understanding more what their working style was like, what made that person tick, what they did when things weren't going well, which in our case turned out to be really, really important. Like Chris had been through a pivot before. I knew that going into it because I had talked to the founder of Rody, where he was like the founding head of engineering. And so I knew that he was capable of that, and that he could be like a steely-eyed missile man through that type of storm. And then I think the last thing that we did was we actually did a double date with our wives. And we all got together and just got to know each other a little bit more. And all of that kind of happened. I mean, all of that happened before we made a formal decision to work together and found the company and really hammer out like what our founder deal was.
Wow. I think I think the way you just described it is so right. It's really a marriage in so many ways, especially if you're going to spend 5, 10, 15 years together building. I don't know if it's just right now. I'm not exactly sure, but I've been seeing a lot of early stage companies who have very real founder problems, like between the founders, and it is really messy. Actually, I have not seen that in a company that I've been in, so I'm witnessing it in some of these companies, and it is really bad. Like if it goes wrong, the dynamics on a lot of fronts, from cap table dynamics to, investor dynamics to employee dynamic, like it can get really bad. And I think that's no one else in the podcast so far has brought that up. And I feel like it's really important for people to hear that, of take the time and really because there's a lot of these like incubators or accelerators, and they're like, you need a founder. And someone's like goes outside. It's like, anyone a founder? Okay, cool. Like, let's jump into it. But what you're talking about is the right process, the reference checks, doing some work together, having your significant others meet. I think that is really, I think people need to hear that, because I think people sometimes jump into it and you don't realize what could happen down the road if you don't get that hire right.
I completely agree. And I think, to your point about you're seeing lots of early stage founder issues. I mean, I don't know this, but we're kind of coming out of this world that was like the world of like the shotgun new startup, right? Where it was like, oh, there was a million ideas out there. Capital was cheap. They were like shoving capital down everyone's throat. They were trying to pluck every like quasi good operator to start a new thing. And that's a market in which there's just lots of stuff coming together really, really quickly. I think there's something to be said about just being thoughtful about your co-founder and the team that you bring on. And I think just being thoughtful in everything about that, those early sets of decisions when you're founding, about who's your customer and what's your product that you're going to build. And if there's as an early stage founder, you feel the need to go really, really fast. But I think in a lot of ways, you're much better off in that first year and a half, 2 years, maybe just going slow and thoughtfully, because at that point, you have the most flexibility you're ever going to have in the history of the company. Because as soon as you hire a team and you really raise capital and the clock is ticking, you lose that flexibility. And so treasure that flexibility and take your time and be thoughtful in the early days.
I mean, these last years have been crazy. It has not been an easy climate to build things in. I think probably the winning formula on this cycle, and certainly something I'll take with me, is a more wartime mentality. Like, we've had to push as a hospitality business through COVID. We've seen the supply chain world disintegrate. The market has flipped its desire for what companies do. The capital markets have frozen. It's been around every corner, another corner. And I think
we'd started to build a dynamic where the team was always in action mode. It's always trying to fight through to the next battle. And I think it's enabled us to have the agility to make these pivots, which are unnatural for companies, and kind of get through it. And I wish that was a tendency that I'd had in companies prior, where sometimes you vacillate on those pivots and changes more, and it's hard to give up what you already have. It's harder to walk away from what works to what you need to do next. But once you get a culture of shit's going to go wrong tomorrow anyways, and we've got to find a way to fight no matter what, it really enables you to move at a speed that I think startups have to, and then often forget that they have a superpower. So yeah, culture wins every time.
And do you think, I couldn't agree with you more. My question is, when times are good, can you create that wartime culture?
Yeah, keep a book between companies on these lessons. It won't be nearly as easy. It's great when you've got an external foe, because the pressure is, listen, I've got 20 million in the bank. I told my VCs I was doing something that's going to work. Why would I change it? I'm just going to cover this up, spend a little bit more money, take a little bit more time, figure it out. This employee sucks, but maybe it's just a bad month. Let me give him another month and we think it out. In war, and when the shit's happening outside and your customers are dying or the market's changing, you don't vacillate on any of those choices. We've got to make a change. It doesn't matter how much money we have. We just got to move now. That employee is the right chapter for them. We got to make a move there. I think the trick is how to do that in the future without being an asshole, right? Like, there's definitely famous CEOs, Andy Grove moving Intel, like people have made major changes that have created, moments in history. I think that you need a way, the way I'm hoping to frame this forward is a way to create almost artificial crisis, where you're putting a pressure on the company that is somewhat natural to itself, but also somewhat part of what you're seeing in the market, and you're exaggerating it to a degree. One of my favorite founding stories is the CEO of FedEx disappeared for one period, and everyone's like, where did he go? And it turned out he went back to join the military that he was once part of. And when he came back, he's like, yeah, UPS just did same day. I got to get into a war mindset. Like, I need to freshen up my hunger. It's like a psychology bench to bring back to the company. And obviously, it's a much more extreme than I think that we all need, but it's too easy to use the framework of a startup under normal good times to avoid the hard conversations. And I think creating some kind of necessity to react to the ecosystem and get a little more drama to it is going to be healthy.
Thank you again for your support. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have comments, suggestions, CEOs you think would be good guests, feel free to email me at david@politisprojects.com. See you for the next episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.